Montana Territory, August 1874, the stagecoach came apart like dry kindling against rock, wood snapping and iron shrieking as it tumbled down the gulch. By the time Xavier Danton reached the wreck, rifle slung across his back and boots crunching over shale, buzzards already circled overhead. He moved fast. The coach had splintered at the base of a slope, one wheel spinning loose, half buried in brush. A mule lay dead near the edge, flies thick around its eyes. Xavier pushed aside smoke and dust, his sharp eyes scanning for movement. "Hello," he called out, voice low but carrying. Something shifted behind the broken door panel. He rushed forward, gripping the edge and pulling it open with a grunt. A woman. Her dress was torn, her skin pale under a sheen of blood, but she was alive. She blinked up at him, dazed, lips parted in silence. Long strands of dark hair clung to her cheek, and her arms trembled as she tried to sit up. "I've got you," Xavier said, crouching down. "You hurt bad." She shook her head just slightly, eyes wide with fear or pain, maybe both. I do not know," she whispered. He saw then the way she cradled her midsection protectively, how her hands kept hovering low over her belly. "Easy now," he said, his voice gentler. "Name's Xavier Danton. I run cattle near here. Let me take you back to the ranch." She hesitated, then gave a slow nod. Xavier lifted her carefully, trying not to jostle her more than needed. She was light, smaller than he expected. He could feel her heart pounding through her dress, fast as a hummingbird wing. As he carried her up the slope toward his horse, she clung to his shirt like it was the only solid thing in the world. Back at the ranch, he laid her down in the spare room, his late sister's old space, untouched since she passed 2 winters ago. Clean linens, quiet walls. He brought water and a cloth, and she let him gently wipe the blood from her forehead. "What is your name?" he asked. She looked at him a long time, like deciding whether to trust him. "Prudence Zeller," she said finally, her voice soft but steady. "Prudence," he repeated and nodded. She slept for hours. Xavier kept watch from the corner, reading the land through the window, waiting for her to stir. When she did, she looked around like she was not sure if the place was real. "You are safe," he said. "No one else made it out of the wreck." "I am sorry." Her eyes filled, but she blinked the tears away fast. Later that evening, as the sun dropped behind the hills, she stepped outside the door, wrapped in a borrowed shawl. Xavier was chopping wood near the fence. "I owe you my life," she said. "You do not owe me a thing," he replied, pausing with the axe in hand. She hesitated, then looked down. "There is something I need to tell you." Xavier straightened, sensing the shift in her voice. "I am not alone," she said. "I am carrying a child." The words struck the air like a hammer on stone. Xavier's breath caught for a beat, but he met her gaze without flinching. "Yours?" he asked gently. Prudence nodded. "My husband died in Kansas 3 months ago. Fever took him. I was heading west to stay with my cousin in Idaho. I had no one else." He set the axe down and walked over. "You do now." She looked up at him, eyes wide. "I do not know why you helped me," she said, voice trembling, "but I need you to know I am not looking for charity." Xavier's jaw tightened. "I did not pull you from that coach because I thought you were a burden. You are not." Her lips parted, but no words came. He could see her trying to hold herself upright, to be strong when the world had fallen apart around her. She looked like she had been holding back tears for far too long. "Prudence," he said, softer now, "you can stay here, as long as you need." She gave a small nod and turned, walking slowly back inside, her hand resting on her stomach. That night, as wind whispered through the cottonwoods outside, Xavier stood at the doorway to her room. She was asleep again, one hand curled near her face, the other resting gently over her belly. He watched her breathe, slow and even, and something settled in his chest. He had not meant for this to happen. He had not asked for it, but he was not about to walk away from it either, not from her. Not from the child. He shut the door quietly and walked back to the hearth, where the fire still burned low. The house had been quiet for too long. Now it felt like it was waking up again, and so was he. The wind shifted with the season, coming off the mountains sharper now, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke. Xavier had cleared out the shed behind the barn and converted it into a drying room for herbs, a task he hadn't made time for in years. Prudence had asked if she might use it for steeping teas. She said certain leaves eased her nausea, and he'd said yes without hesitation, though he scarcely understood what half the plants were. She rose early each morning, always before him, and he'd find the kettle already warming when he stepped into the kitchen. She moved quietly, shoulders drawn in, careful not to take up more space than she thought she should. But she had a way of noticing things, mending the sleeve on his best work shirt without being asked, straightening the boots by the door while humming to herself in German. One evening after supper, while the light stretched long across the pasture, she stood with her hands folded over her apron and looked toward the fading sky. "I used to think the land would always frighten me," she said, not turning toward him. Xavier leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Does it still?" "I don't know," she said. "It doesn't feel empty the way it used to." He watched her then, the way her figure caught the last of the gold light, the faint curve of her belly just visible beneath the fabric. She did not speak often, but when she did, her words stayed with him. The next morning, he saddled his mare and tied a second mule with packs. "I'm heading to town," he told her. "You need anything?" She twisted the ends of her shawl between her fingers. "If they have dried ginger root, I'd be grateful," he nodded. "I'll look." He returned late, dusty and tired, with a sack of supplies slung over his shoulder. She met him at the gate, eyes catching on the handle of the tin kettle he'd traded for a finer one than the battered pot she'd been using. "You brought this for me?" she asked. He handed it to her. "The storekeeper said it holds heat better, thought it might help." She took it with both hands, her silence full of something he couldn't name. That night, he found her knitting in the rocker by the hearth, the firelight softening her features. She glanced up as he entered, then back to her work. "I'm making booties," she said after a while. "I know it's early yet, but it helps to keep my hands moving." Xavier sat in the chair across from her. "You think it'll be a boy or girl?" She smiled faintly. "I don't know. I try not to imagine too much." Life has a way of changing plans. He studied the way her fingers worked the yarn, precise and steady. "Maybe it won't change this time." She paused, eyes lifting to his. "Do you believe that?" "I think some things get built slow," he said. "But sturdy if you're patient." Her expression softened. "I haven't known much that lasted." He didn't answer right away. The fire popped quietly between them. "I lost someone too," he said, his voice low. "My sister, 2 winters back. She was the one who made this place feel full." Prudence's gaze didn't waver. "It still feels full." The silence that followed wasn't heavy, just waiting. She rose first, setting the knitting aside. "Sleep well, Xavier." His name in her voice sounded like something new, a promise, or maybe a question. "You too, Prudence," he said, and watched her disappear down the hallway. That night, he didn't sleep much. The sound of her soft footsteps lingered even after the house had gone still. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking of the way she'd touched the kettle like it had been a gift instead of a trade, and how the child she carried already felt like part of the land, like part of something taking root here. He didn't know where it all would lead. But he knew he wasn't letting go. By mid-September, the first frost touched the grass in the north pasture, and the days grew quieter. The cattle kept close to the lowlands, and the trees along the creek began to yellow. Prudence spent more time outside now, though she still moved with caution, her steps slower, her hands always busy with something small and useful. She'd taken to airing out linens in the sun, pinning them one by one with careful fingers while humming low under her breath. Xavier watched her from the barn one morning, leaning against the stall rail as he rubbed down a restless gelding. She didn't move like someone waiting to be rescued, more like someone rebuilding herself piece by piece. That afternoon, as he repaired a broken section of fence near the hayfield, she came walking up the slope with a tin plate covered by a cloth. She held it out without a word. He set down his hammer. "What's this?" "Cornbread," she said, "with honey." "You missed the noon meal." He took the plate, a little surprised. "Didn't mean to." She didn't turn back right away. "I used to bake for my father's men. He ran a smithy in Abilene, kept 3 apprentices and a wagon team. Said a good cook kept tempers from flaring." "Smart man," Xavier said, taking a bite. It was warm still, the sweetness unexpected. "You learned young." "I had to," she said. "Mama passed after my youngest brother was born. There wasn't time to grieve. We just kept going." He nodded, chewing slowly. "You miss Kansas." She looked out across the field where the wind bent the grass in long waves. "There's no going back to what it was." But sometimes I still see the dust rising off the road at dusk, and I think I'll hear my brothers calling in from the forge. Xavier lowered the plate. You got kin left, 2 brothers still living, she said. But they're scattered. One's in Greeley, the other went to Galveston. I haven't seen either in years, he considered that. You want to write to them? I don't think they'd answer. She looked down, voice quieter. Samuel, my husband, he didn't think much of my family, said they'd only meddle. Xavier didn't answer right away. The wind stirred the edge of her skirt. You can do things different now, he said finally. You don't have to carry other folks' choices. She looked at him then, her expression unreadable. Do you believe people can start over? Not all at once, he said. But piece by piece, maybe. She held his gaze a moment longer, then nodded once and turned back down the hill. That evening, as storm clouds gathered along the ridge, he found her standing near the back porch, staring toward the horizon. Her shawl was wrapped tight and she held a folded paper in one hand. I wrote them, she said without turning. I don't know if I'll send it. He stepped closer, hands in his pockets. That's your choice. She glanced up at the sky. You ever leave anything behind? He took a breath, slow and even. I left Tennessee when I was 19, never went back. There was nothing there worth carrying forward. You came west alone. No, my sister came too. We had a plan. She kept us steady. Prudence let the silence hang between them, quiet but not cold. I wonder what she'd think of me. She'd have made you tea and told you to rest more. His voice gentled. She'd have liked you. Lightning flickered far off, and thunder rolled low behind it. She turned toward the doorway, then hesitated. You don't have to stand out here alone, she said. He followed her inside, the wind pressing against the walls as rain began to fall. The kitchen was dim, the lantern casting a soft gold over the table. She lit the second one without asking, then set it near the stove. He watched her hands as she moved a little slower now, but still steady. Are you afraid? He asked. She looked over, surprised. Of what? Of what's coming? She thought for a while. I was. But less now. Why? Her answer came quiet. Because I'm not alone anymore. Xavier didn't speak, but something shifted in him, then some long-held tension easing away. He picked up the letter she'd left on the table, not to read it, just to hold the weight of it. You'll know when it's time to send it, he said. She nodded, folding her hands over her stomach. The baby kicked today, just once. He met her eyes. That's good. She smiled, small but real. Yes, it is. Rain tapped steady against the windows and the fire crackled low in the hearth. Neither of them moved to leave the room. The night stretched quiet around them, not empty, but full of something unspoken building slow and sure as the season turned. The first snow came early, a thin dusting that clung to the rooftops and softened the edges of the barn. Prudence stood at the window with her hand braced against the sill, watching the flakes drift down in slow, uncertain spirals. She'd wrapped herself in an old wool coat Xavier had found in the attic, the sleeves a little long, cuffs rolled. The smell of wood smoke clung to it. Xavier came in from the cold with his shoulders dusted white, a coil of rope slung over one arm and a pail of feed in the other. He stamped his boots by the door, glancing toward her. You shouldn't be on your feet so long. I'm fine, she said, not turning. It's only snow. He set the pail down and unlaced his gloves. I know, but it's hard on the joints when the cold sets in. You need to keep warm. She looked over at him then, her expression unreadable. You always speak like someone who's lived through more winters than he wanted to. Maybe I have. He crossed the room, took a seat near the stove and held his hands over the heat. The fire crackled low behind the grate. Prudence turned from the window and joined him, lowering herself carefully into the rocker across from him. I've been thinking about the spring, she said after a while. If I'm still here, we'll need a place for the baby to sleep. You'll still be here, she paused. I mean if. If I haven't worn out your kindness, his brow furrowed. Is that how it feels to you? I don't know what to expect from a man like you, she said. You take in a stranger, feed her, give her a roof, and never ask anything in return. It makes me wonder what kind of debt I'm building. Xavier leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I don't want you thinking of it that way. This isn't about owing. Then what is it about? He met her eyes. It's about what's right. And what feels right? She held his gaze, then looked down at her hands folded in her lap. When I was a girl, I used to imagine what it'd be like to have a place no one could tell me to leave. I thought it'd be a little house with a peach tree out back and shutters that didn't rattle in the wind. We could plant one in the spring, he said. Might take some coaxing to survive, but it'd grow in time. She smiled faintly. You're always so sure things can be made to last. Not sure, he said. Just willing to try. The kettle began to whistle, and Xavier stood to take it off the stove. He poured water into 2 mugs and brought one to her without asking. She accepted it with a nod, cradling it between her palms. I've never seen a man take care the way you do, she said. You fix what's broken before it even falls apart. I had to learn early, he said. When you're the only one left, there's no one else to do it. She didn't speak for a while, just stared into the steam rising from her cup. Do you think people can love again, even if they didn't think they had it in them? She asked. His voice came quiet. I think sometimes it finds you when you've stopped looking altogether. Prudence looked over at him, slowly this time, her eyes searching. And if it does, then you hold on with both hands and don't let go. The words hung between them, not rushed, not uncertain, just true. She set her mug down on the table, stood, and walked over to where he sat. Her hand rested lightly on his shoulder. He looked up at her, and she didn't look away. You make me feel safe, she said. You are, he replied. She moved closer, and he stood. Their hands met first, fingers twining without hesitation. It wasn't bold, but it wasn't tentative either. It was quiet, like everything between them had been, but sure in a way that made the air feel warmer. Outside, the snow kept falling. But inside, the house held a different kind of stillness, the kind that came after long waiting, when something good had finally taken root. By December, the river froze over, and the sun rose thin and pale behind veils of cloud. Prudence's belly had grown into a firm swell beneath her dress, and she moved with care now, one hand often resting low as if to steady the child within. The house had taken on a different rhythm, measured, steady. No longer a place of waiting, but of living. Xavier had built a cradle. Quietly, without saying much about it, he'd worked in the barn between chores, carving the slats by lamplight and sanding the edges smooth. He brought it inside one gray morning, cradled in his arms like something breakable. He didn't announce it, just set it near the hearth and stepped back. Prudence crossed the room slowly, running her hand across the grain, her eyes tracing the shape. You made this, she said. He nodded. She stared at it a moment longer. It looks like something meant to last. It is, he said. Later that day, she asked him to walk with her along the edge of the property, just to the rise where the trees thinned and the land dropped into a shallow valley. The air was bitter but still, and the snow only a thin crust beneath their boots. She paused where the fence line bent, leaning lightly against a post. I dreamed of him again, she said. Xavier waited. Samuel, she added. He was standing at a riverbank. I was on the other side. He didn't wave. Just turned and walked into the trees. You think it means something? I think it means I've let go. He didn't say anything, but when she reached for his hand, he took it. They walked back in silence, the kind that didn't need filling. At the porch, she stopped him with a touch to his arm. I want the child to have your name. Xavier blinked, unsure he'd heard her right. You've given us a home, she said. And more than that, you've given me quiet when I needed quiet and strength when I couldn't find my own. That's a kind of love I didn't know existed. He looked down at her, and when he finally spoke, his voice was rough at the edges. You sure? I am. He took her face in both hands, brushing his thumbs across her cheeks. Then I'll be proud to carry you both forward. She leaned into him, and he kissed her firm, warm, steady. The wind tugged at the hem of her coat, but neither of them moved, not until the cold pressed in again and they stepped inside together. When spring came, it came all at once. The snow melted fast, and the river ran high with meltwater. Prudence labored through the night, pain drawn over her features like tight canvas. Xavier stayed close, boiling water, fetching cloth, silent except when she needed his voice. Just before dawn, the child came, a girl, full-lunged and red-faced, fists balled tight. Prudence wept, but not from pain. When Xavier placed the blanket-wrapped bundle in her arms, she whispered the name she'd chosen. Lena. He sat beside them, watching as the baby rooted toward her mother's chest. You'll be good at this, he said, so will you. They married that summer. No preacher, just the two of them standing beside the creek with sun cutting through the leaves. He wore his cleanest shirt, and she wore a gown she'd sewn from muslin bought in town. It was a quiet promise, spoken in plain words, but it held. They became husband and wife the same way they had become everything else, patiently, without rush, and with both feet planted firm. Years passed. The ranch grew, but not too much. Xavier took on a second hand to help with the herd, a boy from a neighboring farm who needed steady work. Prudence planted an orchard along the southern fence line: peach, apple, plum. Lena grew up with dirt on her knees and a dog at her heels, her laugh echoing through the high grass. They built a second room onto the house, then a third, a porch swing, a smokehouse. Nothing grand, but all of it real, all of it theirs. On warm evenings, they sat together beneath the cottonwood tree that shaded the yard, her head resting on his shoulder, his hand wrapped around hers. "I never thought I'd feel this settled," she said once. "You earned it," he said. "So did you." The wind moved soft through the grass, and from inside the house came the sounds of their daughter, humming to herself as she set the table. Xavier turned to his wife then, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "I love you, Prudence," she smiled, eyes shining, and leaned in close. "I know," she murmured. "I love you too." And they stayed like that in the last light of day together, always.